Does this one look very good? Let's see if we can make it look better. First, would you agree that the whole image needs to be darker? Anytime it's the whole image, you grab the which slide? Exposure. Yeah, you got it. And you bring it down until the vast majority of the image looks the way you want. There might be one area that's blatantly getting too dark. As long as it's not the vast majority, we're trying to get the vast majority. So I'm going to bring it down until I think the vast majority is starting to look okay. And for me, I'm thinking right about there, because in my brain, I'm thinking I have a slider that controls the dark stuff, shadows. So I know I can get to those dark things. So I did that. Then I'm going to say shadows, because that's the dark part of the picture. I think it's a little too dark there, where the iceberg is. So I'll brighten that up. And that's interesting, but when I shot this, it was like at sunset. And can you see a hint of yellow coming out over here? And you see a hint of the reflection here, but it doesn't feel like it. So if you look at the sliders over here, you see where yellow is? I'm going to see what happens if I push this away from blue and towards yellow. Now, we lose it in some of the iceberg, because the iceberg was nice being blue, but look at what we're starting to get. Oh, not that far. Ooh, about there. Let's move the other one. I'm not sure, but let's just see. That's weird. Oh, I'm starting to like that. I don't know if you do or not. Now I want the color to come out more, and we have two sliders for that. One of them works more on mellow colors, which means the stuff up here that's somewhat mellow compared to over here where it's so easy to overdo that, and that would be Vibrance. Now you can overdo it, and I would say overdone photos sell well, but photographers will complain about. If you sell your pictures to photographers, then listen to photographers. If you don't sell your pictures to photographers, listen to clients, people that buy your pictures. And some of them buy ridiculous looking stuff. I might want to see if I can get the sky a little darker. Let's bring down our highlights, see if we can do that. Only a little bit, but we can. You missed the blue in the iceberg? Yeah, we can bring it back though. I'll show you. And then I'm going to bring up clarity to get a little of the detail to pop. So what I have right now is I'm liking what's going on with the warmth. What I'm not liking is the iceberg. And that's because everything we've done affects the entire picture in general. The only way we've been able to isolate something up until now is based on brightness. We pretty much had a shadows and a highlights slider, and they isolated bright and dark stuff. Well, there are ways to isolate areas in your picture in other ways. We can even paint on the image and do it. So I'll just give you a hint at this, but we can do it more in another session. And that is at the top, you know, all those tools across the top. So far, we've only used these things for zooming in and out. You used that thing, which was for clicking on things that should be a shade of gray, should have no color, really, in saying make them so. And it really, when you use that eyedropper, it affects the entire picture. It just says, based on this area, we're going to measure what's wrong with the picture here where there's supposed to be no color. Well, therefore, what color is showing up? That's what we have too much of. Yeah. But anyway, we used the crop tool, so we haven't used two of those. This is for leveling your picture. And then we haven't used this guy over here. Let's try it. That's the adjustment brush. The adjustment brush, when you choose it, changes what you see on the right side. It changes it so we have a limited set of sliders. We don't have as many sliders as we had when we were adjusting the entire picture. But this allows me to paint on my picture a particular adjustment. First, I load up my brush by moving these sliders. I'm just going to guess what I want, because right now if I paint, nothing will happen because all these sliders are zeroed out, and I'm asking for no change. But when I move one of these sliders, nothing happens to my picture because I haven't painted it in yet. But if I move this way to say, go away from yellow and towards blue, then when I paint, it's going to shift things towards blue away from yellow. And if I paint on my iceberg, hopefully I'll get that. So now I'm going to click over here on my iceberg, click, and start painting. And since the reflection right below it is just like the iceberg, if the iceberg becomes more blue, shouldn't the reflection become more blue? I'll paint down here. Now I'll tell you more about how to paint with this, because right now I'm being generic about it in a moment. But for now, I'm just trying to get some of it onto my iceberg. And then we can fine-tune what we're putting in by moving the sliders, now that we can see where it's happening. And so I can move this little temperature slider and say, oh, look, we got a blue iceberg. Oh. And I can come in here and say, well, maybe bring out more in the shadows. There's only so much you can get, but it can try. Maybe I say, since we brought down the highlights everywhere else, let's bring them up in the iceberg, see if it, does that help the highlights come out just a little? Let's just try contrast. Who knows? Just move it, see if it helps. Okay, but now I'm starting to get a blue iceberg within that sunset, right? So this is the adjustment brush. You get to it at the top of your screen, right there. You guess at what kind of adjustment you need, knowing that you can always change it after you paint. So you just move a slider, just so you'll see something at the moment you click and drag. So usually overdo it so you can easily see it. Once you've painted on your picture, then you can fine-tune what it is and move all sorts of sliders. Heck, I moved a bunch of them here. Let's see if the tint slider helps. Okay, like that. And so let's just look a little bit about that brush. Did you notice that I had a brush like this? I clicked here, but it got no overspray onto the sky. Even though I let that brush, the circle of the brush, overlap the sky.
I was wondering why you didn't zoom in to do it.
Well, usually I would. I'm being lazy, so. But if you look at my brush, you see a crosshair in the middle? That's because there's a setting that's automatically turned on when you first have Photoshop installed, but will remember what you used last, so yours might not be on by default. And that is one called Auto Mask. In Auto Mask, what it does is when I paint with this brush, it looks at the color that's underneath that crosshair in the middle of my brush and says only get the paint on that colored stuff. And if the color dramatically changes to something else, stop adding beyond that. So as long as that crosshair was touching the iceberg, it knew not to go beyond the iceberg and hit the sky because it was automatically trying to constrain where the paint was going to whatever looks similar to what's underneath the crosshair. Had I let that crosshair ever touch the sky, it would have suddenly gone onto the sky and affected it. The checkbox I'm talking about is at the bottom of these sliders. It's right down here. Auto Mask. If that was turned off, then when you paint, you just paint. Meaning if I get on the sky, you see it's affecting the sky. Even if I didn't get the crosshair on the sky, if I just got part of the brush up there, it would have been getting overspray into that. It's only because the checkbox called Auto Mask was turned on that it limited it to that, and I had to be very careful to not allow the crosshair to touch anything but iceberg. And it only worked on this image because not much else in the picture looked like the iceberg. If there was something in the background that looked like the iceberg in color, it would have been affected had I got overspray on. So that's Auto Mask. Now at the bottom there's a checkbox here called Mask. If I turn it on, it will show me what part of the image is being affected. So I can see, did I get the whole iceberg? Did I get areas I didn't want to get? Okay. And so I got some areas out here I might not have wanted to get, some areas out here I might not have wanted to get. And there are choices up here. There's a choice called New. That means create a new adjustment, meaning I'm done with this one. I need to adjust a different area. So I'm not going to do that. The default is Add, which means if I let go and click again, just keep thinking about this adjustment, adding it to more and more areas. But then there's a choice called Erase, and that means let's take it away. So now I could choose Erase, and I'll get it over there and say, get it off of that stuff. And if Auto Mask is turned on, it will try not to get overspray beyond what looks like is underneath the crosshair. Yes, usually I'd be zoomed up, but I'm being lazy right now because we have a limited amount of time. And I can come up here and say, I can see just a hint of green covering the water. I'll see if I can get it off of there. Okay, that kind of thing. But that's a checkbox called Mask to let you actually see the area that you are affecting. And there's a little thing next to it. If you clicked on that, you get a color picker where you could change the color that's used for the overlay. Because if this was green grass, green overlay might not be useful. So you could change it. Turn off the mask checkbox, the overlay goes away. This little pin that's here represents the adjustment because you can have more than one on your picture. And so you might see more than one of those sometimes. And the one with the black dot in the middle is the one you're actively working on. The other ones would just have no dot. And there's a checkbox here called overlay, and that means should those pins show up. They might still be there, it's just we're going to hide them because they're distracting. That's what overlay is. So there are all sorts of things we could do with the adjustment brush, and we can spend more time with that later. So there are a limited amount of sliders here. Not every one that we had for the main image is available here, but you can see how if you get one particular area where you really don't like it, you can paint on it. So in the picture with the horses, if they look too blue, I just paint on the horses. Just shift them, not force the entire picture to be done. Or if I needed to bring up the shadows only in the horses and it didn't look good on the rest of the picture, adjustment brush is where I go to for that. Questions?
Yes, let's see. We've got some Fab1 and one other person also want to know, what if I want to change the clarity just on the grass and not on the horses? And this is exactly how you do it. You just paint it in.
Yeah, and what's really nice is that you can also, let's say you upped the clarity on the entire picture to +20. Everything's popping, +20. If you go to the adjustment brush and set its clarity setting to -20, all you're doing is removing the +20 that is on the entire picture from wherever you paint. Because +20 -20 equals 0. Make sense? So if there's anything that got overdone in any particular area, just set the adjustment brush to a negative number that is the same as whatever's being applied to the whole image. And you're pretty much undoing it. So in this particular image, for instance, I might not have liked shifting it way over to blue where the sky is. So I grab my adjustment brush. Remember, double-clicking on these sliders resets them, zeroes them out. So anything I didn't want to change, I could zero out. And I'm going to say, let's not take in fact, let's move it this way, where the sky is. Make sure auto mask is on. Yes. I might have bumped the mountain there. I'm trying not to let the crosshair hit the mountain. And I might have bumped it in one spot. If so, I should have chosen undo and redo that, because I'm usually more careful than this.
Well, really quick, do you have to undo in that moment, or can you go back?
You could choose erase and then go back and paint over the area that you didn't mean to do it. But if I chose undo right now, it would undo the entire paint stroke that I did because I'd never let go of the mouse button. When you let go, that's a step you could undo, kind of thing. But if I noticed it afterwards and with one little chunk that needed to be undone, I'd simply choose erase and erase it off of that area. So now, since I've isolated the sky, I can see, well, what is the best white balance for the sky? Oh, I actually like it way over here, like that. Maybe I want more contrast in my sky. Okay, that kind of stuff. But you got to be careful. In this case, we haven't zoomed up real close to be absolutely certain. You do need to do that if it's going to be reproduced large. Just trying to get you the overall feeling for this tool.
Ben, how do you decide on which settings to change? Exposure, contrast, highlight, shadows, looking at a specific picture. Is that a trial and error we need to play with these settings? Or do you have a general approach that you take?
Well, in general, I try to fix the biggest problem first. And if I can't figure out what it is, because sometimes you just look at a picture like this one, I just look at it and I'm like, I don't know, it just doesn't look good. That's what's wrong with it. And there's not a look better slider, you know. Well, just try to break it down, knowing the more you know about how the different sliders affect your image, the easier it becomes. Because I look at this image and I go, yeah, I don't like it. But what's the biggest problem? What is the problem that if I didn't fix it, it's a throwaway picture? To me, in this particular case, it's the dark stuff is so dark you can't see what's there. So that means shadows is the first thing I do. That's the biggest problem for me. Okay, now that's fixed. Now, look at it as if it's a new picture you've never seen before. What's the biggest problem? It looks dull, just ugh. Well, maybe it's the color. there's not much of it, right? So, okay, that might be the next thing I'm going to do. But I go for the biggest problem first. So I bring up the color. Now it's colorful. What's the biggest problem? It's blue. Well, what's the next thing I do? Let's fix the blue. Okay. Then I look at it. What's the biggest problem? And sometimes the answer is, I don't know. And so I'm just going to go try some stuff. You know, contrast. I'm going to always try bumping it up, bringing it down. Oh, I actually like it a little lower. Highlights. Maybe I want to darken them up. You know, there's just start playing after a while, but mainly do the biggest problems first. And if it's just a blah picture, also don't forget to look up at the bar chart. If there's, see the huge gap on the right? Well, whites will fix that. Now it's starting to look a little bit more like a normal picture. There's a gap on the left. I mean, we're starting with this, getting to here so far. So biggest problem first, then reevaluate the image, biggest problem, until you get down and you either run out of problems, patience, or time. That's when you're done.